Chapter 2. The council chamber had not been fully repaired. The high vault of the Quantum Temple still bore the traces of the attack. A fan of hairline fractures radiating from the center skylight, the irregular shadow of scorched crystal where the Krokonian strike teams had breached the wall, a stink of ozone and burnt mycelium that even the best filtration systems could not mask. Along the perimeter, slabs of emergency shielding stood at awkward angles, a patchwork of blue and amber fields buzzing with the raw, unsteady pulse of a defense grid rebuilt in hours, not weeks. Ryoshi entered with deliberate steps. He had left his helmet at the door, but the pressure band on his temple throbbed in time with the wounds of the building. 7 members of the High Council waited at the round table, their bodies bracketed by the warble of their personal shields, eyes all turned inward to their own calculations. Behind them, junior scribes hovered at hand, hands trembling as they tried to keep up with the real-time record. Here a stylus skipped, there a data sheaf quivered. Everywhere the sense of a system pushed to its edge. Ankin stood at the north quadrant, just inside the shadow of the backup projector. He had traded his field armor for a ceremonial tunic, but the fabric clung too close to the muscle, the color too stark against the bruises that now ringed his forearms. He did not look at Ryoshi, nor at the council, but at the floor, as if reading a message written just below the surface. The debate had been going for hours. The first voice to rise was Councillor Vell, a thin woman with an accent that could cut steel. "We have no way of knowing the Krokonian intent," she said, every consonant a gavel. "A measured withdrawal from the mining quarter would allow us to re-establish the perimeter. Every history of occupation begins with the mistake of overcommitment. You know this." Ryoshi watched the ripple of agreement move around the table. Even after so many cycles, the old habits persisted, the deference to the analytic, the reflex of minimizing loss. He waited for the counterpoint. Councillor Merrick obliged, slamming his palm onto the raw wound of the table's surface.
"And if we do nothing, they'll entrench, fortify. Next assault, they bring orbital support. We lose the whole valley, not just Dustville."
A third, Councillor Kess, spoke with a gentler voice, but the words were no less sharp. "We must consider the civilians. Mining ops are the lifeline for the region. A scorched earth response only serves Krokonian propaganda." Ryoshi let them circle, weighing their positions as he had weighed the movement of troops hours before. He measured the angle of Ankin's jaw, the rhythm of his breath, and found a thread of impatience that was not his own. Councillor Merrick turned, finally, to Ryoshi.
"You led the defense. What's your assessment?"
Ryoshi drew a breath, letting the cold air still his nerves.
"The Krokonian force that breached Dustville was not intended to take ground. Their mechs were first generation. Their shield units ran on recycled loops. The perimeter lattice was child's play to disrupt."
He let that hang, then added,
"They were probing for response, timing, coordination. They wanted to see how quickly we would rally and how we would use our best assets."
Councillor Vell nodded, but did not concede. "You are suggesting restraint, then?"
Ryoshi shook his head. "No, I am suggesting we strike before they can recalibrate. A surgical counter, targeted at their forward ops relay. If we move in the next 24 hours, we retake the mining quarter and possibly draw out their command node."
Counselor Kess leaned in, fingers steepled. And the cost?
Ryoshi leveled his gaze. If we move with precision, minimal civilian risk. If we wait, there is no such assurance.
A silence, heavy and bright. Counselor Merrick broke it.
Who leads the counter?
Ankin Varro has the field experience, Ryoshi said, without hesitation. He risked a glance at Ankin, who still did not look up, but whose hands had curled to fists at his sides. Vel's mouth thinned. The junior teams are not ready. 2 of the acolytes are still in recovery from the last—
They will adapt, Ryoshi cut in, or they will be lost regardless. The Krokonian intent is to pressure us into paralysis. If we do not move, we are dead already.
The counselor at the far right, old enough that his hair had gone clear, lifted a hand for silence.
We authorize the operation, he said. Limited engagement, highest discretion, no reprisals.
Ryoshi bowed in acceptance. It was more than he had hoped for, less than he feared. The meeting dissolved. Counselors shuffled to their side rooms, juniors gathering the debris of the debate. Ryoshi waited until the room had thinned to a handful, then crossed to Ankin.
Walk with me,
Ryoshi said. Ankin moved in silence, the tension in his limbs visible, every step an argument with the world. They took the long corridor, past the half-shattered murals of Order history, down the broken stairs to the outer ring.
You did well in the field,
Ryoshi offered. Ankin grunted, not quite a reply.
They've assigned you command of the strike team,
Ryoshi added.
Full discretion. You'll need to—
Why not you? Ankin said, and the words were sharp as glass. You've led every critical op since the Day Zero breach. Council trusts you. The juniors trust you. Ryoshi held up a hand, stopping him.
That is why it must be you. I am too predictable. You are not.
Ankin's expression twisted. Something like a smile, but not.
Predictable isn't the same as weak.
No, Ryoshi agreed.
But it is more easily mapped.
They walked in silence. Beyond the shielded glass, the sun began to rise over the mountain ridge, casting a spray of gold through the web of cracks in the dome. It turned the world outside into a grid of possibility, each line a future, each node a point of decision. Ankin spoke at last.
They'll expect a feint.
Ryoshi nodded.
So give them a hammer.
Ankin's eyes flicked up, finally meeting Ryoshi's. For a heartbeat, the old student was there, the restless hunger, the spark of invention, but it was shrouded by something new, something denser and darker at the edge of sight.
Understood,
Ankin said, and the word carried a weight that was both promise and warning. Ryoshi reached out, placed a hand on the younger man's shoulder. It was a gesture of comfort, but also a test. The contact, the transmission of intent, the reminder of who they were and what they fought for. Ankin stiffened, then relaxed. Just a fraction, but enough.
Be careful,
Ryoshi said, voice almost a whisper. Ankin's lips parted as if to reply, but then closed again. He turned away, already plotting the path to the next violence. Ryoshi watched him go. At the far end of the corridor, Ankin's outline fractured in the light, and for a second, Ryoshi thought he saw not a man, but a shadow with the memory of a face. He stood there, letting the silence soak in until the pain in his temple finally dulled. Above, the cracks in the skylight glittered with the promise of another day. Night in the high country was an animal unto itself, alive with the shifting of snowpack, the distant shudder of rocks too cold to hold their shape, the wet exhale of wind that had never touched a living tree. The 12 made their ascent in darkness, taking the old service routes through Switchback and Scree, each step mapped out in silence days before the reconnaissance teams. Ryoshi moved at the head of the column, every sense attuned to the pressure of space and the risk of sound. He could feel the juniors behind him, disciplined but pulsing with the static of their own anticipation. Ankin brought up the rear. Though not out of caution, it was strategy, and everyone knew it. He was a walking failsafe, a promise that nothing would catch them from behind, and also a warning this line would not retreat, not unless he said so. By hour 4, they had cleared the dead zone and entered the Krokonian sensor sweep. Here, the world was cut into slices, corridors of surveillance and silence, each as precise as a knife. The strike team spread out, hugging the rock, pulses low, personal shields running on passive. Ryoshi signaled the halt and watched the data plume from his wrist. The first patrol was late, but that was expected. The Krokonian doctrine valued unpredictability over precision. When the patrol finally appeared, it was almost artless in its predictability. 3 soldiers in mirror black armor, moving with that inexhaustible patience that only came from long training. They walked single file, eyes ahead, sensors running a half-second sweep to either side. Ryoshi waited for the optimal interval, then motioned with 2 fingers. The 2 flanking juniors melted from their cover, neutralized the patrol in 5 silent seconds. No drama, just a small loss of heat and 3 new shadows in the snow. Ryoshi checked the time. 70 minutes to perimeter, he murmured, and the message relayed down the line. The team moved on. The last kilometer was the worst. A traverse across an open col, no cover but the ridgeline. Krokonian sensors saturated in all spectra. This was where the source mattered most, where the ancient tricks came into play. The meditative masking of biosignatures, the walk that was not a walk but a sequence of stillnesses, the trick of never being a single body in one place for more than a breath. At the edge of the ridge, the strike team regrouped in the shadow of an old mining relay. Below, the lights of Dustville flickered in uneasy blue, the Krokonian occupation force broadcasting its presence with all the subtlety of a siege engine. Ryoshi crouched and gestured the team into a tight, silent ring. He keyed his throat mic to local only. Standard 3-point incursion. Red team, flank left, target the command nexus in the old admin block. Blue, you take the generator hub. Gold, with me. We hit the comms relay at H0. A junior, the one with a scar under her eye, raised a hand for permission to speak.
What about local resistance?
Ryoshi answered without pause.
We keep it clean. Minimum force. Non-lethal where possible.
At the circle's edge, Ankin shifted. Voice a murmur that was not for the team but for Ryoshi alone. It's not enough. Ryoshi waited until the juniors had moved off to their gear. Then,
explain.
Ankin's jaw worked, the muscles standing out like a knot. If we leave the barracks, they'll regroup. This isn't a data raid, Sensei. We need to break their lines or it'll be the same fight again in 2 days.
We hit the command, the power, and their comms. That's the doctrine,
Ryoshi said.
Clean, Surgical. No civilians in the crossfire.
Ankin didn't answer at first. When he did, his voice was flat, mechanical.
There will be collateral. The only question is whose.
Ryoshi stared at him, and for a moment saw the boy he'd trained, the one who always looked for the third option when the book said there were only two. That boy was gone.
We do this my way,
Ryoshi said. A silence, deeper than before.
Yes, Sensei,
Ankin replied, but the words rang hollow. The three teams peeled off. Ryoshi moved with Gold, juniors silent and ready, each one's aura tuned to his own. They glided down the slope, using the old tram support as cover, then spread into the abandoned warehouse that faced the comms relay. Through the slats in the floor, Ryoshi watched the Krokonian sentries below. 2 squads, bored but alert, rifles set on non-lethal but with the safeties off. He counted their breaths, measured the rhythm of their patrol, and waited for Blue to hit the generator. At 0200, precisely on time, the generator hub went down, not with a bang, but with a slow bleed. First the streetlights, then the relay towers, then the faint hum of the security lattice. The sentries below looked up, expecting the usual, maybe a blackout, maybe a sabotage run. They did not expect the team that dropped from the roof, moving so fast it was almost silent. Ryoshi watched as his juniors took down the sentries with stun rounds, then swept the perimeter for stragglers. He moved in, using the disruption to walk straight to the comms node. The Krokonian operator there was already trying to reboot the uplink. Ryoshi knocked her out with a targeted pulse, then dropped a virus into the system, overriding the defense protocols with a 4-minute loop. Red was already at the admin block, their progress visible in the scatter of Krokonian defenders falling back, unsure where the main attack was coming from. Ryoshi keyed his mic.
Red, status?
A voice came back, breathless but steady.
3 in, 2 down. Command node is locked but holding.
Ryoshi grinned, just a little.
Hold for 90 seconds. Blue will flush the rest of your way.
He closed the comm and turned to see Ankin's team, supposed to be sweeping the comm's array's rear, already inside, weapons drawn, visors down. Ankin led them, eyes unreadable behind the mask. He moved not as a leader but as a vanguard, the point of a spear, and the others fell into place behind him with the inevitability of gravity. Ryoshi moved to intercept, but Ankin was already past him, teams slicing through the inner hallway toward the next objective.
Ankin,
Ryoshi said on private band,
stick to the plan.
No answer. He watched the juniors, saw how they followed Ankin's lead with a new, desperate edge. He felt the energy in the room shift, the careful choreography of the mission giving way to something sharper, something that fed on the friction of the moment. The main power grid came back online, right on cue, and with it, the Krokonian counter-response. Sirens blared, every street filling with the stomp of armored feet. Ryoshi knew the clock was ticking now. He signaled the juniors to extract, then doubled back to find Ankin. He caught up with him in a side passage near the admin block. Ankin was alone, crouched over the body of a Krokonian officer. The man was not dead, but close, breathing shallow, eyes wide with something like terror. Ankin's hand hovered at the officer's throat, not quite touching. Ryoshi moved in, silent.
He's down. Leave him.
Ankin's eyes flicked up, and for an instant, Ryoshi saw the void behind them. A moment of total absence, as if Ankin were looking at him from a great distance. Then it was gone. Ankin stood, brushing his hand on his tunic.
He's out. Won't be a problem.
Ryoshi looked down at the officer, saw the small, perfect black mark on the man's jaw. Not blood, not a bruise, something deeper, a corrosion of will.
We need to talk,
Ryoshi said, not a request. Ankin followed him into a maintenance alcove. The hush so thick, it almost blanked the sound of the running fight outside.
You're off,
Ryoshi said.
Your tactics, your effect, even your field signature, it's wrong.
Ankin stared, the blue-white light of the source painting shadows under his eyes.
Maybe I adapted,
he said. Ryoshi shook his head.
You're not adapting. You're following a script, like someone's inside your head reading the lines.
A pause.
Would you prefer I went back to the old way? Let them flank us, lose half the team?
Ryoshi felt a spike of anger.
Don't twist this. I trained you to win, not to forget why we fight.
Ankin smiled, the gesture empty.
We fight because if we don't, there's nothing left to lose.
Ryoshi reached out, tried to touch the younger man's shoulder, but Ankin stepped back. For a second, his eyes glazed, the pupils dilating to black.
Are you listening to me?
Ryoshi asked, voice low. Ankin did not answer. He stood still, the tension in his body holding like a drawn wire. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, Ankin shook his head and blinked. The old Ankin was back. Almost.
Sorry, headache. Been running hot for hours.
Ryoshi wanted to press, to force the issue. But outside, the gunfire ramped up, and the comms lit with urgent calls for support.
Get your team out,
Ryoshi said, voice iron.
I'll clean up the rest.
Ankin nodded, and for a moment, Ryoshi believed him. He watched as Ankin slipped away, moving with the eerie, flawless grace that had once been Ryoshi's pride and now felt like a stranger's dream. For the first time since the war began, Ryoshi found himself afraid, not for the mission, not for the town, but for the man he had trained, and the thing that might have taken root inside him. He drew a breath and prepared to end the fight. The opening salvo was not gunfire but light, arcs of blue and white lancing from rooftop to street, igniting the Krokonian shield arrays and painting the alleyways an ultraviolet afterimage. The strike team landed hard, using the cover of the burning relay tower to leap the barricade and roll into cover. Ryoshi felt the resonance in his bones, the tickle of every round that crossed the gap between shield and skin. He counted the signatures. 8 Krokonian soldiers on the south flank, 6 more at the east ingress, 4, embedded in the perimeter mesh, their body heat barely distinguishable from the field generators they guarded. He keyed his staff, letting the stored charge build along the spine, and motioned the first junior forward. She moved with a fluidity Ryoshi admired. Low to the ground, weapon braced for the snapshot that would shatter the Krokonian helmet at the weak point just above the chin. The junior did not miss. The Krok's head snapped back, the body dropping straight down as if unplugged from the moment. Ryoshi advanced, the rest of the team peeling off in a wave, fanning out along the mining quarter's broken avenues. Here, the fighting was hand-to-hand. Krokonian gauntlets versus order staves, their strikes measured in fractions of a second. Ryoshi countered the first attack with a rotation of his staff, absorbing the force and letting it bleed through his armor into the snow. He swept the leg, dropped the Krok to the ground, and followed with a stun pulse that left the enemy twitching but alive.
"Non-lethal only,"
he reminded the team, voice pitched just above the chaos. The juniors adapted. The second squad hit the comms relay, took down the first two defenders with taser rounds, then double-tapped the backup generator with a shaped charge that did just enough damage to disable, not destroy. Ryoshi caught up with them at the main relay, ducked a wild blast from a panicked Krok, and disarmed the man with a flick of the staff.
"Status?"
Ryoshi asked, still in motion. "Comms are down. Generator offline," came the reply from Blue Team, breathless but controlled. In the distance, the admin block, Red Team's target, was a silhouette of shifting shadows. The Krokonian defenders there had gone to ground, turning the old office into a bunker. Ryoshi keyed the team mic.
"Red, report!"
Silence.
"Red?"
A faint voice, garbled with static.
"Pinned! North wall!"
Ryoshi cursed, signaled for two juniors to flank left and draw fire. He broke right, skirted the debris field, and reached the north wall as the Krokonians let loose with a withering barrage of particle rounds. The air hissed, the bricks at his side slagging to glass. But Ryoshi kept moving. He saw Red's team leader, her helmet spiderwebbed, bleeding from a cut on her cheek. She nodded at him, wordless, and pointed at the nearest window. Ryoshi understood. He drew a bead, waited for the moment the defender inside broke cover, and loosed a single round. The Krok fell back, leaving a brief, perfect spray of red on the wall behind. The rest of Red's team surged forward, overtook the room, and swept the building with ruthless efficiency.
"Admin block secure,"
the leader said, voice trembling with adrenaline. Ryoshi turned to the street. Ankin's team had breached the barracks, and the results were visible even from this distance. Bodies, most unconscious, some very much not. Ryoshi felt the nausea in his gut, the old terror that always came with a breach gone wrong. He ran to the door, the heat from the fight still radiating from the walls. Inside, Ankin's team moved with surgical speed, every shot deliberate, every blow intended to kill or disable with maximum certainty. Ankin himself was a blur, his staff humming at a frequency Ryoshi had never seen before. Darker, slower, the energy coiling around it in loops rather than spikes. Ryoshi watched as Ankin cornered a Krokonian officer, the man already unarmed, hands raised in the universal plea for mercy. Ankin paused. For a moment, Ryoshi thought he saw the old hesitation, the gap in the logic where the rulebook said capture and the war said end it. But the moment passed. Ankin stepped forward, pressed the staff to the officer's chest, and whispered something too quiet to hear. The officer's eyes went wide, then wider. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Ankin triggered the staff, and the Krok folded in half, the life draining from him as if the blow had turned off his soul. Ryoshi felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He scanned the room, checked the juniors for wounds. 2 down, 1 dead, another clutching her arm, face pale but alive. Ankin was already at the far wall, routing the last holdout from a makeshift safe room. The fight lasted less than a second. Ryoshi caught up, grabbed Ankin by the shoulder.
"That was unnecessary,"
Ryoshi hissed, voice barely contained. Ankin turned, eyes bright with something Ryoshi did not recognize. If we left him, he'd come back for us. They always do. Ryoshi shook his head.
"There's a line, Ankin. We hold it or we become them.
Ankin's lips curled, not quite a smile. Maybe that's what it takes. Ryoshi let go, the feeling in his hand slow to return. They moved to the main square, where the last of the Krokonian resistance had collapsed. Order medics moved among the wounded, patching up allies and enemies alike. The civilians, miners, children, the old, stood at the edges, watching with blank eyes as their town was repainted in the colors of the next regime. The rest of the strike team regrouped at the tram station. The body count was high, higher than the plan allowed for. Ryoshi checked the numbers. 6 Krokonians dead, 3 Order, including one of his juniors. He felt the loss like a pressure in his ribs. He found Ankin standing at the edge of the station, staring now at the snow where it was stained black and red. His staff was planted in the ground, the light along its length flickering in and out as if unable to decide what color it wanted to be. Ryoshi approached, slow. He saw it then, the aura around Ankin. Not blue-white as it should be, but rimmed in black, the edges fractured and twisting. It pulsed in time with Ankin's breath, growing stronger with every inhalation.
Ankin,
Ryoshi said, careful. The man looked at him, the whites of his eyes too bright.
We won,
he said, and the words came out flat, empty of triumph.
At a cost,
Ryoshi said. Ankin shrugged.
Every victory has one.
Ryoshi wanted to argue, to tell him the thing he'd seen, the moment when the source bent to a new rhythm. Instead, he stood beside Ankin, watching the wind carry the last of the battle's smoke away. Above, the sky brightened, a sickle of moon hanging low over the valley. Ryoshi wondered how many more victories they could survive, and what kind of men they would be at the end of it. He looked at Ankin, saw the new cracks in the man's shadow, and felt the world turn a shade colder. Ryoshi found him on the highest point in Dustville, sitting cross-legged atop a slab of broken ore loader that jutted from the earth like a gravestone. The sunrise was late, the sky anemic with haze, but Ankin's silhouette was unmistakable against the pale backdrop. He sat perfectly still except for his hands, which trembled in the hush of early morning, fingers splayed as if resisting an unseen pull. Ryoshi approached slowly, boots crunching on the frozen mud. He was close enough to see the twitch of Ankin's jaw, the sheen of sweat on his brow despite the chill.
Didn't expect you up here,
Ryoshi said, voice soft. Ankin did not turn.
Noise is less up here. Easier to think.
Ryoshi waited, counting the irregular rhythm of Ankin's breath. He knew the posture. Spine straight, shoulders squared, every muscle held taut against collapse. It was a meditation technique taught to younglings in the Order, a way to discipline the mind against distraction, pain, and fear. But this was different. The tension was too much, the stillness forced. You lost 3 last night, Ankin said, voice flat. 1 junior, 2 red shirts. Ryoshi nodded.
You kept count.
Ankin laughed, the sound dry.
Doesn't everyone?
Ryoshi glanced at the ruins below, the burned-out tram station, the makeshift triage tents ringed by new snow.
They'll send another wave, you know. This wasn't a conquest, just a test.
Ankin nodded, eyes fixed on the east.
We're always being tested.
Ryoshi sat beside him, letting the silence grow.
Are you?
Ankin's answer was slow in coming.
We all are, aren't we?
Ryoshi turned, searching Ankin's face for the small signs, the ticks, the blinks, the tells that had always betrayed his student's true state. Today, the face was empty. All the emotion was somewhere deeper or maybe burned away.
"We need to debrief," Ryoshi said gently. "Command wants specifics. Anything unusual from the Krokonians?"
Ankin shook his head.
"They were standard. Predictable. No surprises."
Ryoshi watched him.
"Not even in the way they broke?"
Ankin's lips thinned. They were soft, scared. It was almost... He broke off as if the next word didn't fit. Ryoshi finished it for him.
"Disappointing?"
Ankin's laugh this time was a bark.
"Ha! Pathetic! I almost wanted them to fight harder."
Ryoshi frowned.
"That's not like you."
Ankin shrugged, shoulders drawing in tight.
"Maybe I adapted."
Ryoshi let the words settle, then said,
"There's a line, Ankin. Don't let the fight define you."
Ankin did not respond. He stared at the horizon, breath shallow, hands now gripping his own knees as if to anchor himself. They sat together in the cold, the only movement the vapor from their breaths and the distant flicker of torches below. Finally, Ankin stood, wiping his hands on his tunic.
"I need to check on the evacuation."
Ryoshi rose as well, stepping in front to block his path.
"You're not right. I can see it. You're running hot, even now."
Ankin's eyes met his, and for an instant the mask slipped. Ryoshi saw not just exhaustion, but pain, deep, cellular, as if every cell in the man's body was at war with the rest.
"I'm fine,"
Ankin said, but the words were smoke. Ryoshi stepped aside.
"You're not, but I'll trust you to tell me if it gets worse."
Ankin walked down the slope, boots barely leaving prints. Ryoshi watched until he was out of sight. The sun broke through for a moment, casting the ruins in harsh relief. Ryoshi scanned the town, found his juniors assisting the injured, medics treating Krokonian and human wounds without distinction. He moved through the tents, checking on the living and the lost. The cold was sharper now, the victory already souring in his mind. He found Ankin near the central square, organizing a convoy of civilians for transport out of the valley. Ankin moved with the old discipline, issuing orders, checking the loadouts, patting a child's head with a show of care that looked real but was just a little too calculated. Ryoshi called to him, and Ankin looked up. For a moment, Ryoshi saw it again, the rim of darkness, a distortion in the air around him, like heat shimmer, but cold. The source flickering not blue-white, but with a trace of black. Ankin caught Ryoshi watching, and the anomaly vanished. He smiled, a perfect simulation of the old self.
"Come on, Sensei,"
Ankin called.
"We've got work to do."
Ryoshi hesitated, then walked to him. They worked the square together, moving the wounded and calming the frightened, speaking to the miners who had survived and the mothers who had not. At every turn, Ryoshi felt the gaze of the town on them, saw the gratitude and the wariness in equal measure. When the last of the transports rolled out, Ryoshi and Ankin were alone again. The town was silent, the snow already covering the worst of the battle's marks. Ryoshi looked at Ankin.
"You did well."
Ankin's eyes were distant.
"We survived."
They stood together. No need for more words. Ryoshi watched Ankin's silhouette, backlit by the fading sun, and wondered how much of the man was left. He wondered if Ankin wondered the same. As night fell, Ryoshi felt the whisper at the edge of his thoughts, soft, insistent, subharmonic. It was not a voice exactly, more a promise or a warning. He would not forget it.